Welcome, thinkers, to Season 4, Episode 15 of Thinking Critically, a D&D discussion. And this is a very special one for some viewers. Those who are watching via YouTube, you're looking at my handsome face for the very first time. This is a full video episode. So if you want to see me, what my quote-unquote studio looks like, and obviously the wonderful guest I have on this episode, head over to my YouTube channel, the link of which can be found in the episode description and on thinkingcritically.co.uk. Otherwise, let's get on with the video show. And today I'm joined by Ty Moore, founder of Adventure Slang Productions. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, Ty. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, and it's my pleasure. I really do appreciate the opportunity to come talk about stuff. So Adventure Slang Productions is a small tabletop roleplay game design company, which I went ahead and formed after coming up with this concept for our first product, which is a tabletop role-playing game called Nuovarden. So the game came first, the company came second, and so that's where we come from. And we're about going on a year and a half since launch. Since launch of the company, the game is still in design.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Today's topic is variety. So what does that mean to you in the D&D and wider TTRPG framework?
Well, it means a lot of things, really. And as I thought about the term, because I'm really interested in the deeper issues. You know, variety, of course, means a wide spectrum of things, and probably the definition depends on who wants to use it at the time for whatever purposes. I'm seeing it partly in terms of an adjacent term to diversity, and why diversity and variety are important in the genre. So, you know, and it's not just diversity in terms of who's at the table, but diversity in content and diversity in what we engage when we sit down to play these games.
Okay, so I've got several notes here, and I think you're right in that you can't really, the kind of two are intrinsically or inextricably linked, I would say. So let's start then with that. Let's talk about let's extol the virtues of playing with a diverse group of people. Why don't we start with that nice wholesome intro to the to the show? So from your experience then, both from a design point of view, and that's probably something I want to leverage a little bit more, having not had that experience myself. I'm purely a consumer and not a producer of TTR. Well, I say that hosting a podcast as we speak, so I guess that's not completely true. But in terms of game design, let's talk about that for a brief bit then. So how have you leveraged the kind of natural variety in the TTRPG community to be able to aid that design process?
It comes from, I think, my education. So I have a background in my formal education is in English literature and then graduate work in composition. So I have that whole sort of background of story and writing and communication. And so through the process of my studies and then my developing world view and things like that, recognizing the value of bringing in a variety of perspective and a variety of understanding to story and to gaming and ultimately to design has been a tremendous benefit. It also was part of the process that I covered by way of getting into the industry, because, you know, I came to it as a gamer. I wasn't thinking. I knew I could write stuff. I was writing my own stuff, but I came to it as a gamer and a fan. And then I slowly got involved with different companies through play testing, and then just being in contact with other designers and talking to them about my writing background and things like that. And then them asking me to get involved in their projects. And it slowly built over really a span of the last, in 2022, I want to say 5 years of working my way into the industry as a freelancer. And then coming out on the other side as a game designer myself, which was a quick growth process for me. Again, we're going to talk about variety just based on a diverse experience. I have written across the genre of composition, from, grants and business to fiction, poetry, and now game content as well. So it continues to overlap on itself, this theme of diversification. And, and then that, of course, leads to an awareness of the value of diversity. And some things about variety. I see variety as a gateway to infinity, or to infinity. So the infinite possibility exists within an eternal combination of variation.
Okay, well, and there we go. 5 minutes in, and we've got the tagline, the snippet of the show. So thank you very much. I'm gonna have to start having a scoreboard here, because other listeners will know I always say that's the tagline of the show, and now 5 minutes is a pretty good record. I'll have to check if that's podium or not, but yeah.
That was my target, was my goal.
Okay, yeah, so there's a couple of things I wanted to pick up on then. So you said your background is in English lit, is that correct?
Yep.
And now I'm thinking back now a couple of decades to when I was studying that back in high school, I guess is the equivalent, secondary school over here. And I'm now just trying to see, because it's one of those things where you're like, unbeknownst, I've obviously been colored by that educational experience and those kind of pieces of literature you read and you experience across your life. And I'm now trying to think of like, what things have I inadvertently stolen from pieces I've read over the years? And well, maybe I shouldn't pull that thread too much, because it might be disappointing. But how is that then, specifically the English lit side of things? Because I'm always interested. I've had so many guests on from so many different walks of life, process managers, project managers, all the way up to just straight streamers, to all sorts of people. So one thing I do like to talk about is how their day job or career to date has influenced that TTRPG creation side. A variety of backgrounds.
Yeah,
so I tie it definitely back into the topic.
I think that the answer might be it's almost the other way around. My interest in TTRPGs informed my studies, because I went to college a little bit late. I was in my early 20s before I formally decided to go to school. So I was a little bit behind the traditional curve in terms of going right out of secondary school and into higher education. And the reason why I decided to take the plunge was I wanted to write really good fantasy. So I went into college to learn all of the nuances that I didn't understand as a layperson about what real composition looked like, and design and things like that. And I was working on it, but I didn't trust myself, which was a personal weakness or error, because design is exactly kind of what we think it is. We invent things and we make sense of them and we put them in a logical order, more or less. So I got into college thinking I'm going to go learn how to write great fantasy novels. And then I get into college and I discovered the classics and the Russians and the American modernists and all this kind of stuff. And I lost my mind, because I didn't even know that was a thing. So I kind of moved away from genre fiction altogether, and I went down this long path of high literature for a very long time. And that was the pursuit for my own writing efforts for a long time. I wanted to focus on art, if you will. It's somewhat of a, kind of an uppity, gatekeepery kind of mentality. So it's a learning process that we go through and hopefully learn as we age. So it's funny that I go through all the way through that education, and then I come all the way back around to writing for games, because it's a form of fiction, and it's a form of fantasy fiction, because generally what we play are stories of imagination. So that's where so really I started off being informed by fantasy, and then getting my education, and then coming back to fantasy.
Oh, well, I do quite like how the loop is closed there. Usually it's like, I was a race car driver, and then now now I'm an artist for this, and sometimes it is a bit harder to see the lines, but that is quite a nice little bow on top of that. That's quite nice. I say it often, but my TTRPG experience started from, do you want to play D&D, to a friend, and we said yes, and then that was it. There was no
I mean, that's how I started, but that was in like junior high school,
Yes.
So like I was 15 maybe, And one of my friends said, "Hey, this kid's playing this game, and go learn it and then teach us." Because we were reading The Hobbit, and we were reading the Michael Moorcock books, Elric, the most, Elric and Stormbringer being the most well known by him. And we wanted to play those games, Conan and all that kind of stuff. So, but that was as a child. So, I've had two phases of my RPG experience. The child one, growing into adulthood, the adult hiatus, and then coming back after I'd had several careers, and coming back into fantasy and game design.
So then one extra question then I was thinking there, in terms of, obviously you said designing and I guess running TTRPGs or, adventure games, or however you want to describe them, is a form of fantasy writing, which I agree with. Absolutely it is. But then where are I feel like there should be some really critical differences there, other than the obvious. I wonder if there's anything there that I can't quite communicate. Obviously it's kind of like, what are they called, fighting fantasy, or choose your own adventure is what they are sometimes called. But like, how do they, I guess, how does writing for one of those would differ from writing for The Hobbit?
Yeah no, you're absolutely right. And a mistake, I will say this for the audience at large, a mistake that a lot of young writers make, or early writers, is that we want to transition our stories from the table to readability, right? We think that there's this seamless connection between, that natural 20 that I rolled that made such a great, exciting moment in the game, to how that translates into fiction. And the genres of writing in that regard are completely different. Like when we're talking about game design, we're talking about structure that explains setup. It sets up the scene. There's maybe a little bit of a narrative that paints a bit of color into the encounter, and then there's a lot of discussion and exchange that's generally not all that highfalutin or well thought. Just a lot of friends and people playing together, making jokes and stuff like that. So when you sit down to write the adventure, you have to go back to what is fiction, what is the composition of fiction, and is the details and the setting and the dialogue, the description, those sorts of things, which we don't, we imagine them when we're playing. And maybe there's a little bit of that color again in the narrative that the GM presents to us. But in fiction, it all has to be there, and it has to be right. And it's not just, it just doesn't translate. It's like trying to tell somebody your dream. You had this dream, and you start to tell them, and it sounds like the dumbest thing in the world. Or, if it was a scary dream, that doesn't sound scary at all, or whatever it is. Yeah. It's kind of similar trying to transition out of the game to fiction itself.
Yeah, I always find that it is most of the time you had to be there moment. With all the sessions I run, and I will write the session recap, but it's always, even though I've written like almost 100 now recaps, even still there is something. Again, I'm not a professional fantasy writer by any stretch, but even still there is something there that's not like, it cannot always be as engaging as a dedicated.
Absolutely. I mean, it takes a lot of thought to write something in fiction, right? The characters may have been in a cavern setting for a moment, trying to figure out which direction to go, and then the game master, the dungeon master, says you hear a roar in the distance. Well, in fiction, there has to be, the walls seem to be closing in, and the dank air stifled even the wish for fresher air. Yet the party gathered together, wishing above all that they had all the resources they needed to succeed, when an echoing roar bounced off the wall. Something like that. You're really elaborating in fiction, and you don't do that when we're playing a game.
No, I think it's one of the things, though, that I think DMs should. It's a classic DM tip 101 is to narrate the location or the given encounter or the context by more than just like, you're on a fantasy street. It's what do you hear and what do you smell and that kind of stuff. So I think there is a fine line there, because I'm always super wary of being like, okay, I've talked now for like 5 minutes straight, and everyone's probably like bored and given up on so like, yeah, okay, we get it, we're on a fantasy street. I know what that is. But you do want to embellish a little bit, just yeah, you're not reading the first chapter of The Hobbit to them, but you want to give them a little bit more there. I think a variety of descriptions, I think, is a way to put it.
Yeah, and yes, the variety of those details, the five senses. We could go into a thread where we could talk about 2 additional senses from that, but regardless, a little bit of sound, a little bit of taste, a little bit of sense, a little bit of touch, and then you start to paint the image. You don't have to go on and on and on the way that a book does.
Yes, yeah. It is a fine line, and I've fallen on both sides of that line many times. just ask my players. One thing I did want to ask was, I vaguely remember in discussions before the show, we were talking about your game that's in development, right? What's the name, sorry, again?
Nuovarden. So Nuo, N-U-O, like nouveau, new, and Varden, which is, it's kind of a loose mashup of Italian for new garden, which was the idea a friend of mine came up with that helped us in the early stages. Mike, if you're listening. Yeah, coming up with this idea that it's the garden realm, but it's the new garden since the time of a paradigm shift that causes transition.
Yeah, so I vaguely remember, what are you saying here? I'm just reading it now, about there's basically a non-medieval fantasy. That was what I wanted to discuss. So how does that differ from then your sword and board typical fantasy? And if I might be so brazen as to ask as to what steps led you to that design choice?
Absolutely. We emphasize non-medieval because we wanted people to understand that this is not knights and castles and wizards, dragons. Will frame it's not dragons. We do have a fate worm, which is a sort of insect winged worm that looks very much like a dragon. And that is intentional because we wanted some overlap with the familiar, even though it's non-medieval. I think it's important when you're presenting a new design idea that you have some of those familiar touchstones so that consumers know how to start and get into the world. But it's a non-human being setting as well. Like the cultures are humanoid, but they're not human beings. There is a human being-like culture in there, the Landplak, who are the original people in the setting. But the reason why it fell out that way was, so the real backstory on this game design is that it came out of a dream. I literally had a dream about it. And the dream came from a discussion I had with Mike, where we were talking about player agency, and in 5e, for example, it's the Vancian magic system. You've got spell slots. You've got limitations on how many times you can do the magic and things like that. And the conversation was, why, if a player has an idea, why can't they just do the thing? And so you have these debates and you think about it and you're like, well, you don't want to break the game. You got to have some structure, things like that. And then I went and had this dream where we were all sitting around playing this game where if you had an idea, you could try it. And I woke up and I started making notes, and I made notes to myself for about 2 or 3 days. And then I went back to Mike and I said, okay, here's something that I came up with. What do you think about that? And we started having a conversation in Discord. My daughter got on board, started seeing it, and said, whoa. And then, so the 3 of us, then for about 6 weeks, we just started riffing, on things. But it very much came out of the idea that there was a different form of power from magic. It was an energy, a manifesting energy, and it went along with the theme that you could do something by focusing on it. So what resulted in there were disciplines rather than magic schools, for example. And the disciplines were part of the 8 aspects of reality.
Okay.
Aesthetic, body, mind, mystery, technology, lore, element. Those are the 8. And what they did was, so in the lore, there was this transition from this manifesting energy that was brought in by an alien culture that was then siphoned into the environment, and the environment repurposed it to create additional cultures that then had these abilities unique to themselves. So you've got kind of a little bit of a Avatar thing going, a little bit of a Monster Hunter thing going. You do not have King Arthur. You do not have The Hobbit. You do not have Conan or the Game of Thrones or any of that. Not in that traditional sense.
So I love that, because it's a perfect example of today's topic. You know, that that variety in TTRPGs. And it's also something I've inadvertently again done myself by, I like to say it's subverting expectations, which I know is a bit cringy sometimes because it can be done poorly and too much. But you know, I also like to have things that are a bit different from your classic sword and board, much to the chagrin of one of my players who is like, just give me a dungeon download, please. Just give me 5 rooms with corridors between them, please. And once or twice a year, I'll be like, okay, there's your dragon and your dungeon. Go ahead, go wild. Right. And I'll just put my feet up as you just have. You just storm through 5 rooms and then fight a boss. But so I'm super interested to learn more about that, and I guess how that would, if I was playing in that setting, how does that affect how I play? And I'm the first to say I've had frankly limited exposure to as many RPGs as I'd like, TTRPGs. Given infinite time and money, that problem would resolve itself, but unfortunately I have a life to live as well. And so I'm just trying to think now, like having been fresh off playing a game of D&D 5e last night, very pretty traditional game. Although saying that the main antagonistic force is like illithids and mind flayers, which are pretty alien in nature.
Love them.
Awesome, for sure. Until one of the intellect devourers made my paladin have 0 intellect, and now I'm sad, but so they're pretty alien in nature. So I'm just trying to see how that would, I mean, from your, I guess, playtesting then, how was that? Have you noticed, people approach, I guess, with the freedom of anything is possible, quote unquote, how does that affect people at the table?
Our experience consistently, and I would say, let's just say 98%, because nothing's 100%, has been overwhelmingly positive. And the players sit down within 5 minutes, they've already got it. They're already like, oh, I see what you're doing here. So if I have the discipline of element, I can run around and mess with the rocks and the water and the lava and the fire and the wind. And you're like, yep, mess with it. There are limitations built in. So it's not like, you can't blow up the world, but you can blow up a part of it. And so it's immediately like, I think we naturally, those of us who are so heavily engaged in imagination, naturally can think of options when we're given the openness to do that. And this is the goal, particularly in Nuovarden, for players to say, okay, if I'm understanding my discipline and I think that this fits within my discipline, I would like to try to do this. And the game master's role is just to make sure that it fits within the discipline, so we're not taking away somebody else's moment.
Nice.
And then saying, okay, if it succeeds, it looks like this. If it really succeeds, it looks like this. But if it really fails, be aware that it can look like this. And then you let the dice talk and just, so it's more like sorry, my bird clock is chiming.
That's all right.
The opportunity then is that the players can just go for it, and then the dice just determine the outcome. And from there, we're not too worried about did it break the game? No, because the system is robust enough that it gives that structure without worrying about things being overpowered. You technically can't be overpowered in this game. I challenge playtesters to jump on board and give it a try and let us know.
Oh, if there's anything I love more, it's the guest baiting people to prove them wrong, which I think in the day of the internet is such a brave thing to do. Okay, then. So that's an interesting segue then, because one of my notes I wanted to talk about was variety in if we start with the in-game still, so variety in kind of player characters and having a mixed party, not just in terms of composition, like the mechanic of 2-3 tank healer DPS to use the World of Warcraft archetype, which is actually, I'm probably doing a disservice to RuneScape and probably something else before it as well, versus how important that is. And then again, I want to frame that in this Nuovarden way of how it differs with that as well, with the different disciplines and how that is can you have overlap? What I really loved, what you mentioned a second ago, which really speaks to me, is the not allowing, they're restricted by the scope, so you can't do one another. Well, you shouldn't allow them to do another thing that somebody else that is disciplined in a certain field to do, because then that's kind of getting into their area. And that's something I feel very strongly about when I'm running D&D, is like, I kind of do want to let you do that, but that's kind of the fighter shtick, so they're going to be a bit bummed out if you start doing that. That's super close to me, which, if I'm being complimentary to myself, is good. Of course, because it reinforces that variety, right? You don't homogenize the archetypes, you keep them nice and distinct, which allows them to excel in their certain areas.
Well, it's funny that you put it that way, because there is an inherent multi-classing built into the system.
Okay.
In Nuovarden, so what we have, just real quickly as a quick overview, we have the cultures. So the cultures are the people, and there are 8 prime cultures, and then 7 of the 8 have a subculture.
Okay.
So there are 15 models for character choice. Then each culture is associated with one of 8 disciplines. And I mentioned those before. So body, mind, and each one has it's a opposite, right? So body and mind, tech and element, lore and mystery, silence and song.
Oh, okay.
I feel like I'm forgetting something, but the idea then is that you start your home culture with a primary discipline that your culture is associated with. And then and then as you evolve or level up, at each odd evolution, you gain a new discipline in one of the other areas, but you cannot choose the one that is opposite of your prime until you reach the highest evolution. In Nuovarden, we only have it scaled to 8 levels. One of the things that I struggle with in a system like 5e is reaching that 11th, 12th level, when challenging the players is very difficult. The amount of work you have to do to build an encounter is ridiculous, and you still have 8 more levels to go beyond that.
Yep.
I've run 3 campaigns since 2015, and I've burned out at level 12 every single time. So when I built Nuovarden, I wanted people to be able to sit down, play a campaign in this game for a year, and then do something new. Or if they wanted to kind of homebrew to higher evolutions, there's a system in there. There's a method to do that. That is not very hard. It's not very difficult to see. So you could do that. But even reaching the 8th evolution in Nuovarden, you can game on for days without feeling limited, because you have all of this ability. Now let's go back to that. What does that mean in terms of agency or identity for other characters? The interesting thing that we have found so far in our playtesting is that as people develop their characters, because so much of it is flavor, right? Like, this elemental type person is going to focus on certain types, and they may be in the same party as another one that has their own emphasis. So even within the same discipline, there are different ways to emphasize it. And then you have different builds, even within 8 examples. So with 8 evolutions, you're only going to get 5 disciplines max. So there's 3 you're leaving on the table every time. And as you develop the character, you're going to feel that their story is moving in certain directions, so that when they choose the next discipline, it's for a reason that develops the character as they have evolved in your mind as the player. So there is an inherent or an innate diversity or variety just within the possibilities of how those characters come together. So even if there are multiple characters within, multiple or redundancy, let's say, of cultures in the same party, they will most likely diverge as they develop. We have a home campaign right now where we have 2 characters that are based on the lore, which you would think that would be impossibly boring because lore is history and information. But I don't think that there's more emphasis on a discipline than lore as you go, because that's how you know, should I touch that?
Yes.
How can I feel better after I've touched that? Where did that come from? Where are we going? How do we get there? All these sorts of things, they become more relevant than can I turn a tree into a pillar of sand?
Yes. Yeah. So firstly, I don't know if you saw my tweets recently or read my mind or whatever, but what you described there about the 5e hitting 11 and 12 is like literally exactly what's happening. I can't. It's weird that you said that. That's how close it is, because literally they're level 11. I'd given them, they were clamoring for some combat, as I was just describing. They were like, we just want to fight a few things. So I said, okay, here you go. And you're absolutely right. Architecting an engaging encounter that wasn't just, I hit you, you hit me, I hit you, you hit me, took forever. Getting that balancing right took forever. And I'm like losing sleep because I'm going to bed and being like, oh God, is that fire giant going to one-shot them? And then that's it, like, because he hits like a truck.
Yeah.
And then they ended up having, without resting, 3 in a row, literally bang, 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 3 deadly encounters. And I think only 3 of them of the 5 went down at some point during those 3, and nobody died. I guess the most important thing is they all loved all 3 encounters and were very like, that was super exciting and we had this to do and this to think about. And I was like, yeah, good, because I don't want to do that again soon. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Literally level 11. And it's one of the reasons why their leveling is so slow, because I'm not like, it just gets worse. Like, I know it will. And I know I can feel that it is just going to get more and more trickier to build those exciting encounters. And at lower levels, you can just be like, okay, here's 10 bandits that have encircled you. Boom, done. I knocked that up while we were playing. Now it's like, oh, okay, yeah, but that low HP but high AC, so maybe he could last like this, and then I need 5 other mooks to just walk around and take hits, and then the other one, and then maybe if there's a moving bomb that's on a train that they have to stop, and then how does that mean? And then that's basically counts as an enemy. Yeah, and I'm like, right, okay. And that's what everyone I tweeted about my frustrations on the topic, and I was like, man, they just steamrolled it. No, to be fair, steamrolled is it's too strong a word. It was challenging, and they were very stressed at some points, and they pushed their way through. And a lot of my very helpful and friendly Twitter followers were like, "Oh, have you had a dynamic environment or something?" I was like, "Yeah, I did it all.
Yeah,
I did it all, and it was just about good." So yeah.
And did you spend 12 hours building it?
Yeah, precisely. It takes and then doing the maps and being like, oh, we need line of sight blocking here and interesting things they can't get to, or it's only small creatures or only large creatures and all this other stuff. So yes, I'm sorry I ranted and raved, but it's because it was so
on point with it. That's exactly part of it. Now, the other thing that I would like to observe in terms of like the theme of variety is that within 5e, and you talk about concern about overlap again with classes, like in Dungeons and Dragons, and yet the way that the system works, from what I can see, is it is redundant class to class. The thief and the bard overlap. Everybody's got a magical option, from barbarian to thief, to fighter.
Yep.
So I think I can see. So okay, variety within a system can make it very watered down.
It's a double-edged sword, for sure.
Definitely. And I'm talking about a massive range of races. You will not catch me playing a sentient hippopotamus. I just can't do it. It doesn't work for a turtle or any of them.
Yep.
And I think that there are games like Redwall, things like that, Mouse Raider, that do that better. because it takes focus and structure. Otherwise, diversity or variety becomes variety, not diversity. Variety becomes too broad.
Yes.
As well.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be a balance. However, I do think that variety within genres for players of tabletop role-playing games, everyone should be exploring something besides the great D&D. In a way, what happens to D&D, and the reason why, in my opinion, it feels watered down, is that they try so hard to appeal to everyone that it falls upon the dungeon master to shave that away and get it more narrowed again. But then you're called a gatekeeper, which isn't fair, because you don't want maybe monster races in your parties.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, if everything is available, then like I've a little rant. My opinion about D&D is D&D tells a story about human and demi-human people that are struggling in an environment where there are things that go bump in the night. And when you play the things that go bump in the night, there's no more threat. It's just gang warfare. Basically, it's cantina D&D, as I refer to it. and it, for me, it kind of diminishes my personal enjoyment of the genre of fantasy. Now I'm a bit of an old like sword and sorcery kind of guy. Like Conan was my jam and things like that. And I really can understand and appreciate people that want to play like all animal party and stuff like that. So not to take that away from anybody, but it does risk watering down the system.
I know. So a couple of comments on all of that. Double-edged sword for sure. And I know that the subclasses have been critiqued as, now you, like, everybody can be a magic caster, even historically ones that were meant to not be any magical at all. You can, like, barbarian, for example, is now you can be a magic barbarian, and that I can understand why people would grimace at the thought. In fact, one of my one of my players, that the sword and board lover, is very much like, we've got a Warforged in the party. Like, why have I got a robot following me around now? And he's in his defense, he does meet us halfway. But it is always that everything is context. Right? Everything is the setting. Everything is not up for the debate. But obviously, some things are very much not up for debate. But it's to be discussed, I guess, is a way to put it. So the DM is a player too. And I do find it quite funny that obviously that's, a lot of people will cry that from the, shout that from the rooftops, the DM is a player. But then the moment it comes to, well, hey, hang on, I've spent hours crafting this thing, and a flying rabbit would kind of make it a bit weird. Suddenly they're not allowed to have that opinion anymore. And I'm like, well, no, for sure. Right. Like, and it's give and take, as is with everything. And if you are building a setting and most of the players, DM included, are on board with a particular style and a particular theme and a particular aesthetic, and then you have the auto gnome, which is from Spelljammer, which is like a robot gnome clanking around doing goofs and stuff, it's gonna take people out. And at some point you have to make the call of, like, is that person's desire to play, where does the scales tip from that person's desire to play a robot, which is absolutely justified and fine, and there's nothing wrong with that in of itself, but then where does that outweigh the 4 or 5 other players' enjoyment of playing with a standardized, a setting that makes a cohesive sense,
right? But
that's go on.
This does speak to the variability of experience, and I think that's why session zeros are valuable, when you can sit down and say, okay, do you want a silly game, or I've got a vision for a very gritty, emotionally charged, dramatic game, which is harder to pull off. It's like horror. It's hard to pull off horror in a game. But when you will commit to that line, although in my experience, not enough people will, whether you have 4 players or 12, there's going to be at least one that would continually break the immersion, because that's our habit when we sit together in a social environment.
Yeah, for sure.
I know. I was running a campaign where I had 8 players. Wow. And I was watching Game of Thrones religiously, and I was building in very rough, gritty things because I was inspired by what I was, the content I was consuming. and about half the party was getting it, and about half didn't know what to do with themselves. And so, it can be problematic. And that's, I think, why, by and large, most groups have sort of a tongue-in-cheek approach. Because we do want to sit and have fun. We don't want to walk away feeling depressed or disturbed.
Yes, there are other mediums for that. I think if you're only going to play once a fortnight, you don't want to turn away depressed. Yeah, I think I'm very fortunate in both the games that I play. The groups of people that I play with are very much cognizant of that line between like, this is a serious moment and I'm going to wind my neck in and not be like, oop, fart noise.
Right.
Because that would overall not be that great. But then we do obviously have moments of, film references and pop culture and joking around farts. Why not? Because we're puerile and immature. So yeah, I'm very fortunate in that you can have that variety of play styles, but it takes a lot, and I'm fairly certain that's why most either games or individuals within other games, either the games break down or people want to leave or aren't getting satisfied, and it's because there is just that misalignment of expectations, and that, which is fine. Like, that's life. Welcome to human beings. That's just people are different and like different things and enjoy different things. And the sooner, as you said, the value of a session zero, the sooner you can, you think the Saw films are funny, and I think they're scary horror films that I never want to watch. That's probably going to come up, like, that's going to be a misalignment further down the line. The sooner that kind of discussion comes up, the better. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had experiences where some players quit because there wasn't enough support, character to character. People didn't look out for each other, or because there was no adherence to any alignment besides murder hoboism or greed or, all for themselves or, things like that.
Yeah.
And then that's what we reference as bleed in role-playing games, when the emotions bleed into our actual experience.
Yes.
And those things have to be addressed, or you do lose players and you lose friendships.
You can do, yeah. Absolutely. I've definitely experienced that with a younger group of players. I mentioned it on the show before, and it was an immaturity piece at that time on both sides, because I wasn't mature enough to be like, well, hang on, that's what you've just said is, you're not playing the game anymore. You are now just annoyed, and you are exhibiting those emotions in a non-constructive way. And I still kick myself to this day for not clocking that a bit earlier and being like, hang on, let's take a walk for 5 minutes because we need to talk about a few things. Because what you're now just being aggressive and you're not playing the game anymore. And yeah, that absolutely can happen. That's like the worst big badder brother to my guy syndrome is when it's just me syndrome, I suppose. Is
Yeah.
Oh, go on.
No, I was just agreeing with you. But that is one of the things about the role-playing games that makes them so unique as well, is they parallel life perspective. They parallel world view. And that's why there's conflict sometimes when somebody has a strong ethical sense of something that isn't supported in the game or by another character. And that is, but you're right. Now that, as we age and understand how to handle conflict better, we have an opportunity to address it so that it doesn't ruin the game, let alone the friendships.
Yeah, that I've also had in my current game that ideological differences, which again, always like good, get them in your player characters if you can separate yourself from them so enough that you can play them effectively, because it's a source of friction between player characters, which is great. That's the fun juicy bits can come from. Oh, I think we should do X, but I think we should do Y. We've reached a fork in the road. Let us discuss that. And I have some huge one of the guys in my games, he's very much like, we shouldn't kill things. We should, all these creatures are being manipulated, so we shouldn't just murder them because it's not their fault, or they're under duress, or they're, you know, prisoners or whatever. Whereas most of other people are like, no, he was just trying to kill us, so now I'm going to kill him. And that has led to quite a few, those just ideological, philosophical discussions. And then several times, because I obviously have a holistic view of the rest of the party, I have to jump in and be like, okay, let's try and work to a decision, guys, because now it's just the two of you doing, you know, A-level philosophy, and nobody wants to nobody, I don't think even you guys want to continue this discussion anymore, so one of you please compromise. But they lead to the memorable moments, so, and then character defining moments, of course, so they're always interesting. Well, we have just smashed through a couple of my notes there, because I wanted to talk about, we started talking about, should I say, the variety in different player characters, and we've very much finished with the variety in players and how that affects. So I'm stoked that we've done two birds with one stone there.
Excellent. Yeah.
So in terms of other games then, and obviously from a design point of view, my background is in more video games. My undergraduate is in video game design. That was certainly a passion of mine growing up. So I'm going to sound so pretentious, but whenever new groups of people or colleagues or whatnot are like, oh, what games do you like, Danlo? I always sigh a little bit inside, because I'm like, oh, well, probably not the ones you like, and probably other ones for maybe reasons you didn't think about, because of I did do some education in them, and I can be very pedantic and particular. But obviously, it grants me I have a slightly different lens on the industry as well as individual games and the developers behind them, and that affects the kind of things I play and enjoy. So I wanted to see how that is the same, if there can be a parallel between that and kind of, you know, being a TTRPG designer. Has that revealed, has that pulled back the curtain a little bit? Can you see the nuts and bolts of systems like 5e a little bit more, or through a different lens, maybe, that goes, I can see why they've done that bad decision, for example?
Yeah, I think yes. There's a couple of ways to approach that. First of all, I try very hard not to be, critical of anything really in a very strong sense. There are no doubt weaknesses with my own design. There are weaknesses in other designs, which is true also of any book or movie or song, things like that. The artists did their best at the time, and maybe I would do something different, or maybe I'm in awe at what they've done. I will say that the game, the Nuovarden design in particular, and the Fortunes D4 system, which is also our own system, are both designed very specifically to address a wide range of things that I do or don't like about other systems. And I come at this from having played a number of systems. Probably, I'm sure there are people out there that have played many more than I have, and some people that haven't played very many at all. But from my experience in the 80s and 90s, and that, I probably, I don't know, a good dozen different systems. Well, some of them were overlaps with TSR, what they were doing at the time, Gamma World and Dungeons and Dragons, and Boot Hill or Top Secret, et cetera, et cetera. And then things like Twilight 2000, Cyberpunk 2013 was the very first iteration of that game. Torg, Recon, things like that. And then getting now with probably just as many new systems, Blades in the Dark, or Mutant Epoch, or Morkborg, or things like that. So looking at all of these sorts of things, I, as a consumer, am fascinated by the variety, and I love it. And that's why I think it's important that people understand that there's more than Dungeons and Dragons. And I like Dungeons and Dragons, and I will play it, but there are other things to experience that bring you into a different world, and can give you opportunities to be something else. Call of Cthulhu is one of my very favorites. Things like that. As a designer now, though, I love my game. Just to be completely unbiased, it's for me and for Erin, my daughter, who is my co-lead design writer mechanics expert.
Yeah.
We very much enjoy talking about in our game, and that's probably similar to the experience that other designers have. We ourselves have a podcast through the company, and we just had a conversation with D'Angelo Murillo, who designed Emerald Templars, and learned some things that are in that system that are brilliant, that didn't even cross our minds. And now, we're low-key kind of jealous about the inventiveness. But this is the value of it being exposed to the variety of those other systems. And I think that it's really underappreciated and low-key misunderstood by the current mass generation of new D&D players, that there is so much variety out there that really deserves to be explored.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to put you on the spot now. Sorry. What is your favorites? Okay, exclude your own for the sake of this discussion. But what is your favorite system then, and why? In which case, then?
I have to say, in general, that a D100 system is pretty cool to me.
Okay.
I like D100 systems. Call of Cthulhu, Mothership, Mutant Epoch, Recon. Those are ones that immediately come to mind. But I do like the ranginess of them, which is funny because it's almost the opposite of my system, which is much more compact, robust nonetheless, but still compact. But yeah, the D100s are cool. I like D20s and I like D100s. I can say that quickly, off the cuff.
And so yours is a D4 system?
Yes, it is, yeah.
So almost the smallest that it could be in terms of dice.
versus
a D. Versus a D.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise you'd be flipping a coin at that point. But yes, versus your preferred system. So look, hands up, I'm ignorant. I'm the first to say I've read more books than I've played in terms of different systems. Obviously, I have a very intimate knowledge of 5e. So I'm just trying to understand then how this D4 system works.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm used to rolling a dice. There's some modifiers on it. Doesn't beat a number. That's pretty much it. That's it for 99 rolls out of 100.
Exactly. The funny thing is that the fortune system and the D20 system essentially work within the same percentage ranges.
Okay.
When you have a single D4, obviously you're talking about a 25% chance to roll any single digit. Now we have an aspect of the system called primacy. And when you have a discipline, when you are informed on a discipline, you have primacy in that discipline. And primacy is a resource pool of points that allow you to change the outcome of one die roll each action up or down. Now, your target generally is the 4 on the D4. That's your win.
Oh.
If you roll a 3 then and you have primacy, you can bump it to a 4. However, you begin with 2 D4 in your dice cache at your first level. So you can choose to break those up into 2 1-die actions or into 1 2-die action. And then when you roll, you can decide if you want to change the outcome of that roll or not. What that does then is, in the 2-die format, it increases your possibility for success to like 70%, which is not far off of, with all the modifiers in D&D, changing your outcome for your target modifier there. So in some regards, it's the same, but it's not exactly the same because you're spending resources. And if you overspend your resources, then you're out of resources. Or if you don't have the discipline, you can't do certain things. That's where some of the limitations come in that create that balance.
Sure.
So now we also have an additional feature in the game where an ally can spend one of their dice from their dice cache to throw in on your roll when it's your turn to try to influence the outcome for your benefit. They take a risk and they spend a resource to benefit an ally. And what that does, it does a couple of things. It increases the percentage for success. And we have 2 kinds of success. We have the miss but recovery, which allows you to take like a bonus, like a booby prize for missing. You can increase your armor, you can heal, you can gain primacy back, you can remove a status effect that's affecting you negatively.
Mm-hmm.
or at least bypass the disastrous high failure, which is the critical failure.
Yeah, sure.
So there are ranges in there, but it also keeps the players all engaged every round to see if there's an opportunity for them to do something in addition to waiting for their turn. So
nice.
So everything stays active.
Yep. Yeah. Again, another potential failing of higher level. Yeah. 5e that you've
as low as 7th level or so.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I've been there. I've experienced it myself on both sides of the screen. So yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't quite hit yet that we might have missed?
Not really. I just wanted to emphasize that I do think that variety can be too big of a thing. Then we lose structure, we lose focus, and then we lose the sense, or things get watered down. Too much variety within a genre is bad, but great variety, genre to genre, is really nice. It's really valuable. And I do want to encourage people to explore outside of the familiar go-to systems, just to get an idea at least of what's really out there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've all been to that lackluster buffet where everything is kind of like okay, but you really wish you had like a really nice steak from a steakhouse. Like we've all been in that situation, so absolutely. And I bought the Alien starter set, and just reading that, I haven't even played it yet. Even just reading that, I was like, this is so cool. This is giving me new ideas, and I'm experiencing a new like design and how to approach problems and that kind of stuff. So that's my slim bit of knowledge on the side there.
I guess it does make me think of one other thing.
Go on.
Consume a variety of media as well to inform your game. Either if you're a player and not a game master, it gives you perspective on how to be a personality that you can grow and evolve. And if you are a designer, then there's all kinds of things to steal, then to put into your game and create a very cool experience for the players.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Ty. Is there anything you would like to promote?
Yes, actually, thank you. So we're on the verge of dropping our beta quick start rules. They will be on our website at adventureslang.com. And in addition to that, we are getting ready to launch a campaign-length program on Twitch. I'm not the host, so it hasn't been announced yet. But if people want to follow my Twitter at Dungeon Mr. Ty or at Adventure Slang, you can get notifications when that is coming up. I can say this month. So actually in a couple of weeks, that will go on for several sessions. There are VODs out there as well. So people are curious about Nuovarden, how it works. There are things that you can find on YouTube, actual plays that we've done in the past. You can get the alpha quick start rules right now, just to get an idea off the website. And like I said, the beta, hopefully those beta rules will be out within about a week or so from the current date. And so look for those. And along with those, there are playtest opportunities. If people want to get to private tables, we run those for people who are interested, not on stream, to explore this system.
Awesome, thank you. Well, yeah, I'll definitely going to check out those Twitch streams. Now I've started Twitch streaming myself, so yes, I'm always looking to again steal ideas and I'm not sugarcoating it. That is what it is. So yeah, it's awesome. Okay, well, as usual, all the links will be in the episode description. And I think by the time this airs, a lot of that stuff that Ty's just mentioned will be out and about anyway. So that all the links should be live in the episode description. Otherwise, all that's left to say is thank you ever so much, Ty, for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we're doing.
Yeah, it's been a ride for sure. Thank you everybody for listening at home. As usual, check out the description, check out my Twitch that I've snuck in at the end there, and all the other good links. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and good night.